So in my last video I did this little sound test, just really fun, where I compared a few guitar tones from totally different devices. And honestly, it kind of stuck with me, because when I listened back, I thought, wait, does it even matter what you're using? So that gave me an idea. Why not take this test and do it properly? Today I'm putting 3 totally different multi-effects units, modulus, floorboard amps, head to head. The Boss GT3, super old but gold multi-effects unit, cost me like 50 bucks on eBay. The Underdog Chuck, a modern boutique tube powered floorboard amp. Wow, that was hard to say. With a bit of an effects. And the Quad Cortex, yeah, that one should speak for itself. My goal is to find out, is it the gear or just knowing what you want to sound like that actually gets you to a certain point. So what I did is that I dialed in 3 sounds that are as close as possible across the devices. I chose a kind of high gain sound, tight low end, a bit of compression but nothing too scooped or too fizzy, something like Rise Against or Green Day, or to be a typical modern Marshall sound in the style of Friedman, I would say. By the way, I would have loved to do that on the Friedman IRX, because that would be the real comparison, but I sadly don't have one. So maybe if someone from Friedman sees that, just as a tiny hint, and you guys can send that to the guys from Friedman as well, so that I can make a real comparison with the Friedman IRX. Then I recorded a short track with each of the isolated guitars and add some drums, bass and synths to make it feel like a real song. We will listen first to the isolated guitars and then listen to the guitars in the context of the song, and then see if and what we can find out as a conclusion. I have a wild guess. I presume that there are drastic differences in the tone quality, but not in context of a song. And I presume that you won't find out what's the €50 GT3 out of them 3, okay? So what I wanted to do is to listen to the devices carefully, because I'm not labeling the devices by name, and I want you to just let your ears decide which sound could be which device. Before we dive into the analysis, let's reveal which take came from which device, since I kept them unlabeled for the blind test. Take 1 was the Chuck by Underdog, take 2 was the old but gold Boss GT3, and take 3 was the Quad Cortex. So have you been right? And to be honest, I was a little bit surprised of how good the GT3 sounded, but that's not really the point of this comparison. This video ain't about finding out if the GT3 sounds like Quad Cortex. That would be pointless. Of course it doesn't. And it's not supposed to be honest. And also I didn't try to make the GT3 sound as modern as a Quad Cortex. Instead, the real question was, I have a specific sound goal in my mind, and can I reach it with all three devices on the same level? And how much effort does that take for me on each one? That's why I used the GT3 as a reference tone, not because it's superior tone, but because I wanted to see, can the other two units, modern as they are, be shaped to fit kind of that raw and compact sound that we have from back then? And even more importantly, does it really make a difference in the end in the mix? Okay, so 3 devices, 1 tone goal. How did I come to the sounds? Finding the sound on the GT3 was fast, no surprise. It's just reference here. I just dialed in what sounded right for me in the context of what I wanted to hear from the song. But something stood out when I recorded it. Just look at this. The sound was super compressed, with hardly any dynamic range, or what's the word for the transients. The word that I was searching for is transients. God, that's hot here. But you know what would be hotter? If you would like and subscribe. On the Quad Cortex, I knew right away what I wanted from the Quad Cortex, and I knew where to navigate. I had this thing in my mind where I was thinking Friedman or something like, and I could target the tone within minutes. I had something that felt close to the GT3, just more detailed, more depth, and more air, I would say. And on the Chuck, it took the longest, around 36 minutes of tweaking. Why? It emphasizes, the Chuck emphasizes more on the highs and the high mids than on the low mid frequencies, no matter which sound I dialed in. In solo, the sounds were thick and warm and really round, and in the mix, the sound kind of dropped off and disappeared. So I had to play a lot with the main EQ to come close to my wished sound expectation. That's not a bad thing, it's just a different beast. More analog, more amp in a box than a digital modular. It's just like real amp, you just don't have that million ways to dial in your Marshall JCM as well, don't you? So let's analyze that a bit, and we can also see what I experienced so far in setting up the tones. The GT3 emphasizes low mids, rolls off the highs, and crushes everything with compression. Think of it like a gritty lo-fi blanket. The Quad Cortex sits in the same range of frequencies, but allows a lot more high mids to breathe while still staying tight and not being too noisy. Therefore, the Chuck sits somewhere in between, more open than the GT3, not quite as flexible as the Cortex. It has a unique personality due to the fact that it isn't a modular and it isn't a multi-effects board. It just behaves like an amp, a very tiny amp with 25 watts, but like an amp. And after shooting all that music powder, I thought I could have switched off all the cap simulations in the devices and just used the IR plugin that I used for the GT3, but to be honest, that wouldn't have been the video, and that would have destroyed the comparison, I think. So how does it sit in the mix? Let's listen to all 3 again, first solo, then in context with the full mix, and you'll notice on their own, isolated, the differences are super obvious. But inside the mix, things get fuzzy real fast. as the band kicks in, it's actually pretty hard to tell what's what, unless you really know what you're listening for or what you're searching for. Still, there are slight sound differences due to the mid-focus every device naturally comes with. Please don't forget that this is just one example. The results can be completely different if you're in the search for a different tone. Actually, would that be a thing for you, that I compare a few other sounds on those devices, maybe without talking too much, or maybe also with other devices? If you're curious about that, just let me know in the comments. But back to the topic. What does this mean for you or your band? At the end of the day, I would say it's not about which unit is better. It's about how efficiently you can reach your sound goals with the tools you have. If you're a punk or a garage or a grunge band and you're aiming for raw and direct tones, you'll be totally fine with an old GT3. No need to spend thousands on a modern model just to filter out features you're not gonna use. But if your sound needs a super detailed, diverse, studio polished, good luck dialing it on the GT3. Sometimes that old crusty multifax unit from the late 90s might be just get the job done if your job is yelling 3 chords into a beer-stained mic at a garage gig. And sometimes you need the power of a spaceship to sculpt that perfect ambient swirl for your post-rock art project. Oh man. But here's the most important question. Which one sounded best to you in the mix? Drop your guess and your pick in the comments. I'm geniusly curious. And hey, this kind of nerdy tone comparison mixed with just the right amount of cheek sounds, like your jam, hit that like button, subscribe, and maybe even ring the bell so you don't miss out the next deep dive into sonic madness, blah 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 blah. Thanks for watching and catch you in the next hangout. Bye.